So my aim today is to help everyone to keep the Venus flytraps and other carnivorous plants alive for years and years and years, and also to share my greater, broader interest in carnivorous plants, because I've been growing carnivorous plants since I was a child, and then later on when I grew up, I worked at a plant nursery, as Olivia mentioned, in Melbourne, and we did carnivorous plants, Venus flytraps mostly, and also an assortment of orchids. And that was a really pretty place to work because I could grow the Venus flytraps or propagate them, and then other people made it look beautiful, and you could just walk around in your lunchtime or coming to and from work and I could see all my favourite plants. But a lot of carnivorous plants die for people within some months after they get them. And you buy your Venus flytrap and it looks okay, and then it gets progressively smaller and smaller over a few months and withers away. But most types of carnivorous plants can live essentially forever, or at least many, many years. And so hopefully after I've given this demonstration, you'll be able to keep yours large, healthy, multiplying for years and years, and maybe be able to give them away to people and spread the interest in carnivorous plants. So here's some Venus flytraps. This little one here at the front. This one's what we call a red one, even though it's more maroon or something. This one's called Royal Red, and it was bred back in the early 90s. And since then, people have been multiplying, propagating it, and giving it away to people. So that is now, what, 35 years old or something? 30 years old or something? Yeah, so they can live a long, long, long time. And back then it was a reasonable size for a Venus flytrap, but with breeding and so forth, the Venus flytraps have been getting larger. So here's a large one. The world record size, though, is 60 millimetres, 63 millimetres, about that wide, which is a bit of a mutant called alien. Largest I've ever grown is about 44 millimetres, about 3 fingers width. And these ones here are probably, 32, 33 mil or something. Right, and my largest one was, if you remember the Venus flytraps in the past, the brand was Miss Frizzles. So this here is a Miss Frizzles crossed with the Royal Red. And either one of those got up to 44 millimetres. Right, aside from the colour of the reds and the normal greens and so on, you can have different shaped teeth. So the normal shaped teeth are these little fine cilia, as they're properly called, teeth. Then there's these sorts here, which are called dentate. They're triangular. Sometimes they call them shark's teeth or saw teeth. And we get on to some of the more mutant ones. These are called microdent. Now the microdent occasionally catches some flies, but not so often. I consider it more like a pedigree cat or something. It's not quite as good at catching things. Whereas this Venus got like essentially a fly in every single trap. And so does flies. This one here, so I see a few flies in traps. And finally, this is a very mutant Venus flytrap called fused tooth. And so I mostly like and grow Venus flytraps that can actually catch flies. I think if it can't catch a fly, it's like why I call it a flytrap. But I like to grow seeds, and I buy seeds from people and then grow them up. And this just happened to grow up amongst a batch of seeds, so I didn't buy it, it just grew. Moving on to other plants. This is a Drosera binata that I've had for many, many, many years. The varieties of Drosera binata can have different numbers of points. I've grown many times. It can look like a fern. I've grown many times. Like a fern. This one grows. And the ones that we've got on sale in the shop, are all grown from these sundews. What I particularly like about these sundews, gooey on these, and flying insects and particularly on them, and flying insects. So if you've got one of these. So if you've got a compost heap or something that has lots of fruit flies around, you can just get this wave it all around over the top of it, and they'll just stick all over it. Yes, so in some of the Venus flytraps also on sale in the shop, there's some of these little tiny Drosera binatas. And these ones self-seed, and they're New Zealand native ones. The Australian native ones are self-incompatible and don't tend to just drop seeds everywhere, but these ones do. But as I said, that's maybe a little bit taller than that. Some of those. And what else was I demonstrating here? And this is what's called a pinguicula, or at least a Mexican pinguicula, or sometimes known as a butterwort. They've got a thin layer of slimy goo just on the surface of the leaves. The main interest with these, for me at least, is that they grow quite large, pretty pink or blue flowers. So these ones here can handle a bit of shade, so they're good amongst maybe if you've got some house plants and a bit of a midge outbreak, fungus gnats and so on. These can grow in amongst your pot plants and they'll feed on all your fungus gnats. Okay. And then Sarracenias. Now the ones on sale in the store are all about this tall. Okay. Next year they'll be taller, the ones but this is probably what it will grow into. These ones have got some nectar around the rim. These ones have got some nectar around the rim. The veins on it, and I presume the veins on an animal likely. So they attract an assortment of different types of insects. Attract an assortment of different types of insects. And just inside the rim there is a waxy. And just inside the rim there is a waxy, slippery surface. What I was saying to Olivia earlier on is that when I'm in the hothouse and a fly comes in, it'll be buzzing around at high speeds everywhere. It'll land on one of these, suck up a bit of the nectar, and it'll fly around. It'll just be a little bit slower. It'll come back and sit on it and suck some more nectar and go, oh, is it going to fall in? Isn't it? And then when it flies away again, it's just going around like really slowly, and I could probably just pluck it out of the air, really. And they get a little bit uncoordinated. So that's how they get into the trap. These things here can actually catch the most insects. So, I don't know about you can see that this thing here is totally full of insects right up to here. So, I deliberately haven't pulled off any of the dead leaves and traps because I'll demonstrate later on how to tidy them up. Now, when you buy yourself a Venus flytrap, what you want to do, of course, is set off the traps and trigger them, which you're not supposed to do. But each one of these traps can close maybe 3 or 4 times, and then it will stop doing that, and then it will die. So that's not usually a problem because the Venus flytrap plant puts out a new trap every couple of weeks. So if you've got 4 or 5 traps per growing point, one dies every 2 weeks, one grows every 2 weeks, that's fine. So I'm going to demonstrate setting one of these off. We'll see if Dallas can get there. So Venus flytraps can supposedly count. There's about 3 or 4 little trigger hairs just inside each lobe of the Venus flytrap, and one has to be touched twice, or 2 different ones can be touched, one each. So we'll see if it does. I'll go and trigger 1. If I can do that. So that was once, and I'll do another one. There we go. That one could count. Did we get that?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, all right. Now, that's only closed partially. It will squeeze a lot tighter. Do I have an example? Like this one here. It will squeeze a lot tighter later on if there's something in it. But because leaves and twigs and things can fall down from trees above and set off a trap, it will just partially close to start with, and then it will just detect whether or not the triggers inside it get triggered more. And if they don't get triggered any further, then the trap normally opens up again and lets wind or rain blow away the debris that set it off. If there's an insect inside it, it'll be struggling, and by struggling it'll keep setting off the little trigger hairs, and as they get triggered it'll squeeze it tighter and tighter and tighter until it's properly sealed, and then that will stimulate the digestive juices to properly digest the insect. If you stick a dead insect into the trap, it might detect that it's an insect, by however it detects it, but it probably won't produce enough digestive enzymes to properly digest it, and then the insect's got a greater chance of rotting, and it rots the trap. So plants should really have live insects. If you have a dead insect that you want to feed, so long as it doesn't have fly spray on it, Sarracenias here, you can just drop as many of those into there as you want to. They don't require them to be moving. Right. Sometimes they get indigestion. If they catch a really big fat fly, then sometimes the trap rots anyway. And what you do, the way a plant, one of these traps dies over time is the end of it goes black, and then the petiole further down will progressively go black after that. And so whenever there's a black trap, you just kind of pull it off like that. And usually the petiole sort of shrivels up and disappears by itself. So, but you can pull those off when they get black enough. Yeah. So, right, now to tidy up. To work out how to grow plants and keep them alive, it helps to know how the habitat is, the habitat they come from. So Venus flytraps come from America, on the border between North and South Carolina, and that's 34 degrees latitude north. And surrounding that area, Sarracenias are growing, and the Carnivorous banata comes, this one here comes from Australia, probably located around New South Wales somewhere, which is probably also 34 degrees south latitude. And yeah, so they all get nice, warm, steamy summers. The Venus flytraps and sundews from the Americas, such as this Filiformis here. The ocean current changes in winter, and so their winters get quite cold, and they can get some snow on them as well, which is quite good for here in Christchurch because it means that they can handle frosts and so forth. Banatas, they get more mild winters. They can still tolerate frost. They do go dormant, but probably don't like -5 degrees like we get here sometimes. And then the last plant type that I'm showing off today, the pinguiculas, they do go dormant. The reason they come from quite close to the equator, but they do go dormant. That's mostly because they have dry winters. But while they're dormant, they are frost tolerant. So the plants I've shown off today are largely the ones that you've got a good chance of being able to grow here in Christchurch with our warm summers, sometimes, yeah, right, and frosty winters. Yeah. There's many types of Carnivorous plants. I've got a few others on display down there, and I ran out of car space, or I would have brought some more. I'll talk about those later if I have time. Habitat destruction and things like that have of course caused problems for the survival of a lot of carnivorous plants, but these carnivorous plants, Venus flytraps and the Sarracenias and some of these others, can grow quite well under power lines where people don't develop, build houses and so on. So places that get mown but otherwise undisturbed can be good for these plants. They don't like any top cover areas. They like to grow in grassy areas where they get full sunlight, and most of them, even though they grow in swamps, do get occasional burn-offs that take off the upper canopy layers. So, right, keep it short. Right, now you probably grow a Venus flytrap indoors. If you do, Venus flytraps, these sundews, they all like a lot of sunlight, and they need a certain amount of direct sunlight actually hitting them. So if you're going to grow them on a windowsill, then ideally a north-facing one, where the sun will hit it for a few hours of the day, and keep it in a tray of water so that the mix stays always wet. One thing about the roots though is although these have to stay always wet, the roots won't grow below the water level, so it's good to have these pots that are a good 10 centimetres or so tall. Smaller type pots, there's a fair chance that you could rot the roots if the water level fills up most of the pot. But the small pots also, they can dry out really quickly. So, yeah, so some of the smaller pots that you might get from some other suppliers, you need to really repot those into a bigger pot shortly after getting them. Ooh, the pinguicula, they can handle a bit less sunlight. So I think I mentioned if you've got some house plants, you can stick them in amongst that. They can just handle with bright and direct sunlight. They can survive full sunlight, the same as the others, but they can survive with a bit less. Oh, and these have short roots. And I should have mentioned that they grow on cliff faces and the trunks of trees and things where there's quite good drainage for the roots. But because the roots are quite short, if you have them in a pot this size, you can still keep them in a tray of water and it doesn't drop the roots on them. Tall Sarracenias, these don't tend to grow so well indoors. If they grow near a window, they grow towards the light and then they fall over like this one, although this one's falling over because it's getting a bit older. So if you're careful and you keep rotating it or something, it might stay upright. But anyway, you can give it a go, grow it in on that bright windowsill and it'll survive all right, but if it does flop over, then you might have to put it outside where it gets sun from all directions. The varieties that I'm growing from selling here, this sort here, they are crosses with a compact species of Sarracenia, so they may not grow quite as tall as that. Most of them are seedlings, so there's a bit of variation in growth. And if it does stay short and compact, it'll be fine indoors. But if it grows as tall as that, it probably has to go outside you put it on a porch or out in the garden. What they don't like is strong wind blowing them around. So I'm supposed to get them to the outdoors. Winter. Right, so these all go dormant in winter. The Pinguicula don't have to go dormant, but they will if it gets cold or dry. But the others do, and they need that dormancy to sleep so that they can have a big flush of growth come springtime. And if they are kept warm through the winter, then they will probably try to keep growing, and then when spring comes, they're not as energetic when they take off. So if you've got an unheated house or room, you can keep them indoors there. They'll go dormant, then they don't need much light. But if you've got a heated house, then it can be good to just maybe put them outside for the winter. And then if they survive and start growing again in spring, you can bring them back inside again. Right. Now, best way to grow the plants indoors is if you grow them in a tray, in a container. What I found when I was giving these to friends and colleagues at work and so forth is that what contributed best to the survival of the plants was to put a line here with a minimum water line and a maximum water line. And when I gave them a tray like this, and they put their Venus flytrap in it, suddenly, almost like magic, their Venus flytraps just survived. And it was as simple as that. If these plants dry out, they start to sulk and suffer very, very quickly. They think, oh, drought's coming, and they'll just stop growing for a few weeks. And then when they do start growing, they'll put up a couple of little traps just to sort of test what the weather's like. So you really have to just not let them dry out. Right, but the problem then with trays is that because you keep topping it up with water and then it dehydrates and then you top it up with more, the salt concentration can increase. So these plants all grow in bogs and swamps and so forth where there's very low nutrient levels. And they can't tolerate high salts, whether that's fertilisers or any other sorts of salts. So every now and again, it's good to flush this out, or flush out the whole pot. Or even during winter, you can put the whole thing outside and just let the rain wash through it over time and wash out any salts that you might get from your tap water. So aside from needing some direct sunlight on them, all day is best, a few hours is the minimum, and being constantly wet, but not too far up the pot because the roots need some area to grow where they get some air as well. There's humidity. So if you've got your plants growing in a hot room or a conservatory or something like that, or near an open window where dry summer air can blow across it, then humidity can be too low. And that can be very, very obvious with these sundews, with the liquidy, with the, I've got one out here, with the sticky goo that's on these sundews. Blow a bit of dry air across those and the sticky goo just dries out so very quickly. It doesn't tend to come back either, unfortunately. A new leaf has to grow. So that's one of the reasons that these things are not sold regularly around the place, because they start to look a bit tatty after a while if, as I said, the humidity is too low. So where you place these, try to avoid any breeze blowing across them. If you can't do that, then you can grow them in a plastic tub or a terrarium, and that'll keep the humidity around them. Right. And I was going to bring a plastic tub showing how I do grow some plants, but I didn't have space in the car, so... Anyway, I'll just emphasise again, lots of water, lots of sunlight, and avoid dry breezes. Right, moving on to growing outdoors. All of these plants will happily grow outdoors, except maybe the pinguicula gets a bit stressed from full sun and needs a bit of shade. But they don't like the wind, and slugs and snails can eat these, even though they catch most other insects. And birds really like the sphagnum moss and other potting mix, and although they won't kill the plant, they'll often pick out plants, and you'll find your plant, you can put it back in again, but they're just checking for any grubs down in the pot, and if there's sphagnum moss, they'll take that off for the nesting material. Growing outdoors also, because we have frosts here quite a long way into spring, the plants will wait until the frosts are finished before they really grow. Sometimes you see a little bit of a trap sort of starting to come up, and you go, oh, my plants are growing, and then you get a frost or some cold weather, and then they sit there and don't do anything for another couple of weeks. But the frost don't hurt them, these particular plants. So I recommend growing plants in a hothouse or a glass house. You might think plants are expensive, but it's actually what you grow them in. So you buy your plants, however much they cost, and you get a glass house, and a spray system. And then the glass house isn't big enough, and you're like, oh, I needed one bigger than that. I'm sure Odering sells good hothouses too, right? Yeah, some hothouses, right. Nonetheless though, when you've got your hothouse, you do still need excellent ventilation in it. There are some fully tropical carnivorous plants which don't need the ventilation, but the fully tropical ones you've got to heat right through winter, and I'm not willing to heat the neighbourhood. So I grow the plants that go dormant in winter. So during summer, it needs lots of ventilation so that the heat doesn't get too high. And then in winter, you need ventilation because the plants can go mouldy otherwise. But when they're dormant, they don't need heat anyway. So it doesn't matter if the temperature drops. Right. So in spring, the hothouse warms things up. Your plants start growing a month earlier. Longer growing season, you get bigger plants. It's great. But then you hit midsummer where the temperature is higher than you need anyway, and then the temperature in the hothouse is 8 to 10 degrees higher. The plants can handle that temperature, that's fine, but the humidity needs to increase at the same rate as the temperature. So if you've got a spray system in there and make sure that everything stays moist the whole time in summer, even if it's up 38, 40 degrees, then the plants will just thrive away happily. They'll get even bigger, you get those 40mm traps and things like that. Right. And having a spray system has also the added benefit that you don't absolutely have to grow the plants in trays. So if you know that your plants are guaranteed to stay moist, then you can do without trays, and that way the whole pot stays aerobic, and the roots can grow right to the bottom, and the plants grow bigger. That's just a side benefit. So potting and potting mix. The potting mix, when it's sitting in water the whole time, it can get anaerobic and a little bit stinky. And of course the salt's building up from your tap water, and you can either water all your plants with RO or distilled water, but that gets expensive, or try to catch rainwater if you're lucky enough. But failing that, the simplest thing is just to repot your plants every couple of years. And if you've been growing them under happy conditions, it'll be filled up like one of these, and you need to repot it again after 2 years anyway. So what we use for potting mix, considering that we're trying to avoid fertilisers because these plants catch all their nutrients themselves, don't need it added, in fact it kills them. We use peat moss. Here's some peat moss. Comes from South Island swamps up in the hills. And we've got some pumice here, which is mostly from the North Island. And perlite, which is much the same as pumice. So whichever's cheaper out of the pumice and the perlite is fine. And if you want, or you could do coarse sand if you want to, but that's all right. Now, when that's all mixed together, I've got some pre-mix here. Looks like that, like normal potting mix, but of course it's got no fertiliser in it. All right, repotting. I'm going to make a bit of a mess here. You can still see. So I brought along this little little Venus flytrap, or Venus flytrap in a little pot. And the best time to repot these is in early spring. So just as you see a little bit of development happening in the buds. And that will cause the least disturbance to them. Repotting them in mid or late summer means that it'll set them back. They'll get a bit stressed, they'll sulk for a bit, growth will slow down, but it shouldn't kill them if you do it properly. Anyway, so the simplest way to repot them is this here. If you're just going to slip the small pot, you can do that at any time. Into a bigger pot, you can do that at any time. And then stick it in like so, potting mix around it, put some more potting mix around it. This shouldn't disturb the root system at all. This shouldn't disturb the root system at all. Want to, and so you can do that any time you want to. So that is just from a small pot to a large pot, and apart from the leaf that got damaged while I was transporting it here, that should continue to be quite happy. Now, what does disturb the plants, so I've got here a pot that's pot bound that needs to be divided up, and it's also a little bit tattered. Right, so we've got the dead leaves here. You can just grab tufts of dead traps and just pull them all off. And these are flower stalks, which you normally chop off early in the season unless you're trying to get seeds. And after giving it its little haircut and trim, the thing about Venus flytraps and most of these other plants is that they don't have a lot of roots, and the roots tend to grow straight down and don't branch a lot. So they don't really sort of spiral around the pot and get pot bound like they do with a lot of other pot plants. But I will demonstrate it to you. Right, so the way I would divide this up is pull it out like this, break the potting mix in half, and then pop out the Venus flytrap, although in this case it's already divided up. Right, and so there's this is now mini Venus flytraps. The rhizomes at the bottom are divided up, so there's one. These are just its little roots directly down the bottom there. That's all there is for the roots. And then another one. There's some potting mix. Some little tiny ones. So how many are we up to now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a couple of little tiny ones there. So pot up a couple of pots. So then, with my favourite tools, which is my dipper and my forceps, I poke a few holes in it. So, then I need to use the forceps. Poke them into the hole there, into the hole there. And then just push the potting mix down around them and give them a good water from the top to settle the potting mix and the roots into place.
find the faucet, Brian?
These I got off AliExpress. Yeah. 25 centimetres. Yep. So that sort of potting should really be done back in the beginning of spring. You could do it late autumn, I guess, but depends how much damage occurs to it. This one here was quite happy to fall. It was already fallen apart. It had divided up, obviously, a long time ago. But sometimes you get ones that are still attached. And if you pull them apart, you get a little bit of the damage. And where the damage points are, new growth will occur. But it tends to be these little tiny ones that grow. So you can end up with lots of extra fly traps from doing this dividing. But if you do damage the rhizomes, you just end up with a lot of little ones, and you have to wait a couple of years to get to the full size. So anyway, that's those. Oh right, onto the fun bit. What I really like to do is to set up a little mini bog garden. Right, and that's when you can get yourself a display of plants and put them in a tub and stick them on your windowsill, and it'll look really pretty. These particular troughs I quite like because they don't have any holes in the bottom already, and you can either fill them up to the level that you want, just keep it that way, or you can drill holes in the side, maybe halfway up or something, so that if you water it, then it won't fill right up. And what I do, there's two things you can do. You can either fill it up with potting mix and then pot your plants into it, like so, or you can just put your plants into it and arrange them. Now they're sitting down a couple of centimetres, so what I do is, which bag of, grab your sphagnum moss, so you can actually fill the bottom with some sand or some gravel or something like that, to build up the level. Nice little layer. Stick a Venus flytrap in it, and a quick killer maybe, some more. Venus flytrap, Drosera, Sarracenia, Wicula. Right, so the sphagnum moss is dropping a little bit, and then you can just fill in the gaps around it with a bit more sphagnum moss. And by doing this, what happens is if the plants kind of grow towards the windowsill and they're tilting, you can rotate them around. Or if you find that one's growing too big for this planter, you can pull it out. Or if you just want to change the way they sit in there, because if you might want the taller ones in the middle or like that. And I nearly forgot. You've got yourself a little narrow pot, you can stick that in there somewhere and use that as for watering. So you don't disturb the moss. That'll also show you how much water there is in there when you're filling it up, because you can see the layer of water nearly there. Lovely, beautiful tree there. So, I'm sure you can tidy it up a bit more than that. But doing that is a good way to display a few plants. As I said, if you get more plants, you can swap them out and this is easy then to move out to outside during winter if you want to, or if you want to change the order of them, you can do so. Anyway, that's that. Now, other methods of propagation. The original Venus flytrap plant I had here had a damaged leaf, I think. They can all be propagated by leaf pullings. So, here we go, this one here. So you damage a leaf like that and it's all flopping around, you just pull it off. And then lay that on some potting mix. Just stick it in amongst your other plants like so. Just stick it in amongst your other plants like so. Sphagnum moss on top of it. And put some sphagnum moss on top of it. You do that. Not too much sphagnum moss. A little bit of light has got to get. Not too much sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss has got to get a little bit of moisture around. Sphagnum moss is just get a little bit of moisture. Check it for a few days to make sure the leaf doesn't curl up. Check it for a few days to make sure the leaf doesn't curl up and pop off anywhere. Then that Venus flytrap leaf will grow little tiny plants along it, mostly around the base. So, let's see. And you can do the same with the sundews and with the pinguicula. You can just pull off the leaves and lay them on the surface of pots, and so long as it doesn't dry out, there's nice humidity, you get more plants. Pinguicula though, their winter leaves are smaller and more compact. Those are the leaves that are best to use for the pinguiculas. So early spring, there's a whole bunch of really dense, compact winter leaves. Just pull them all off and lay them all around, and before you know it, you've got lots and lots. Seniors though, with this one, laying it on the surface might be a bit difficult considering how long it is. You can actually shove them directly in as well, like by cuttings. They'll keep growing. Because this particular variety doesn't grow from seeds unless you can find a different clone, you do need to propagate it by leaf cuttings or by root cuttings. So if any roots go out the bottom, you can nip those off and plant them up near the surface and the roots will grow. Now this has rhizomes. So below the surface here it grows along and just keeps splitting. It's got a few growth points on this now. These do actually have a significant root system, so I won't pop this up today, but in early spring you can pull this out. Actually fully into winter for these, because the first things these do in winter is they put up these flowers in spring and repotting at that time will damage them. So I'd repot this in winter. And then you just grab onto these rhizomes, just rip them all apart into individual pieces. Right, seeds. Growing from seeds is fun. I really love it because you never really know exactly what you're going to get. Importing seeds is getting harder and harder. I've seen that eBay and things like that, they just don't sell any plants nowadays. But if you can get some seeds, you grow them up, and they can get overgrown by algae and moss and things like that. I have troubles growing seedlings, which in the glass house. So I prefer to do it by tissue culture. So I sterilise the seeds and put them into my nutrient agar medium and grow them up. And then they'll grow right through winter, and I can get them to full size in like 2 years instead of 3 years. But anyway, seeds are designed to survive in pots. If you can get them to grow, that's great. But what I've found is that with Venus flytraps, even when you start with a nice big parent plant, about half the offspring produce tiny little trap plants. So, and the same thing with the Sarracenias. You grow these Sarracenias, and of the offspring, the colours, sometimes colour looks great for half of them, the other half the colours just look a bit whatever. But anyway, that's what breeding's all about. The potential to get some really exciting, colourful plants, and the dream of having a massive trap on your Venus flytraps that will be bigger than anyone else's, and the colour and so forth. Yeah, so. Okay, so the problems with, in summary sort of, the problems with growing carnivorous plants is that often you get your plant and the traps just start to go black, and they go black faster than what the replacement traps can replace them with. So That can occur from a number of reasons. It can occur if the humidity is too low. It can occur if, primarily if the humidity is too low. The other thing is if they just get fertilised, or if you put them in a normal potting mix. So remember, no normal potting mixes. Then this is the petiole down here. The petiole grows big and fat, and the traps get really small. And they do that because the plant recognises that it's got plenty of nitrogen from the fertiliser, it doesn't need to trap anymore, so it just goes into photosynthesis mode, and then the plant usually dies. Also, if there's not enough light, the traps get smaller and the petiole gets larger too, to try to catch more light. Venus flytraps, although they come in a lot of different red and green colours, so moderately red and very red, a lot of the time, if a Venus flytrap doesn't have enough light at all, then it loses all the red. And any Venus flytrap which is entirely green needs more sunlight. So that's a good indicator. This one here is not really red, but it's got some red on it. So if all the red goes away, increase the sunlight. So Venus flytraps don't need to catch insects. Right? They'll probably grow a little bit slower if they don't catch any insects, but all they need really is sunlight and water, and they'll just grow. Maybe a little bit slower if they don't have insects. Drying out is probably the biggest problem. You know, as I said, if you have your water minimum and maximum line, and you keep your water between that, your plants will survive as long as they have reasonable sunlight. If they have good humidity, they'll have much better traps, but they will survive as long as they have that water. The moment they dry out, even for a day, these Sarracenias, their traps just wilt and they just flop on over, or at least the new ones do, and I'm guilty of it. I've got a couple of plants here where some of my traps go up and then down and then up again because they're dried out for a day, and these new growing traps here, they just flop over as soon as it dries, like instantly. And I mentioned that the insects do need to be wriggling in Venus flytrap traps. If you put in dead ones, it's more likely to rot the trap. But if your plant's healthy, you don't have to worry about the occasional traps dying. Like I said, they keep producing new ones as long as they have enough sun and enough water. I mentioned fertiliser. Okay, so you've got your plants growing beautifully. You're watering them nicely, you've got the sunlight just right so that you've got a nice lot of red on the plants, you've got enough humidity, or at least not any dry air blowing across them, so the traps are nice and big. It's growing beautifully for a few years, and then suddenly it starts to decline. It's like, why? That'll be because the potting mix has started to degrade, it's going rotten or sludgy or anaerobic, and it's just time to repot it. So if your plant just goes downhill after it's been going well for a while, yeah, just try that. But if the plant's happy, like some of these ones, after 2 years or 2 or 3 years, then the plant will have filled up the whole pot anyway. And these pot sizes, there's enough potting mix in there to survive, as I said, 2 or 3 years. If you do ever get any of the smaller sort of pots from other suppliers, then they need to be repotted so that we can keep them going. I'd probably forgotten a whole lot of things. Does anyone have questions? Yeah. Oh, lots of questions. All right, you, and then you, and then back then.
In winter, what is the watering requirements when they dormant?
What is the watering requirements in winter when the plants are dormant? I treat mine much the same. So I've heard that people stop growing them in trays because there is that slightly increased risk of rotting, and but I have found that the risk of drying out and killing plants from drying out is greater than the risk of dying from root rot. So if you're always looking at your plants and you can always keep them moist and so on, then you cut back on the watering and stop using the tray and just water it occasionally. But if you think there's any risk at all that you'll forget about them over winter and that it might dry out, then keep them in a tray. That's what I would say. Yep, and then it was...
That was my question too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the same question.
So I was interested in your ratio for your potting mix.
Right. Ah, yes. Okay. So I have typically done equal parts of peat moss and pumice. Recently, I've just eased up the peat moss a little bit. To some extent, it's mostly because I think the peat moss was cheaper than the pumice. So the same reactions would occur with the sphagnum moss. So sphagnum moss is considered to be a premium product more so than the peat moss. In the swamps, you start off with a layer of green sphagnum moss on the surface, and then it turns into this sort of light brown sphagnum moss underneath it, and then that rots down into peat moss. So if you use sphagnum moss in your pots, then it should last longer than the peat moss. As I said, peat moss will last 2 or 3 years. Sphagnum moss might last an extra year or so. But the sphagnum moss definitely needs a good amount of, or an equal amount of the pumice or perlite, because otherwise it can squish down and get compacted.
Is it about the roots of filter water is okay? But our water is not.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Because I've got large numbers of plants, I just have to accept that. And so the spray system I've got just has town water. But since they added the chlorine to it, I don't know if it's obvious on these pots, but you do start to get a bit of crusty white sort of discoloration around the edges of the pots around there. As I said, they seem to grow all right, at least for a couple of years in the potting mix with that. But no, filtered water, reverse osmosis, distilled, any of those things will increase the longevity of your potting mix. You just wait till the plant starts to decline and then you just repot it. Yeah.
You mentioned about cleaning up the Sarracenia. So when you're cleaning up the common dead ones,
Yeah.
what does that look like? You pull them right up?
I tear them off as it sort of goes brown. So,
What was the question? Sorry, Rob.
sorry. How do you tidy up these Sarracenias as they get old and die off? Yeah, I just break them off as they go brown, like so. Or more often, I'll just wait till the end of the seasons, which will be in another month or so.
How old is that one? How long do they?
Oh, how old is this, or how long would it take? So, to get from this to this, you could assume that it would probably double in size each year. So this should get to that size next year, and then that size. Then it would stay at this size, and then it's more just the rhizomes growing along and dividing. So, and once you start dividing the rhizomes, you lose track of how old the plant is. So, but I think I did grow this one from seed. So I suspect it's not more than 3 or 4 years old. It was one of the most vigorous ones of my seedling batch, which is why I kept them. And then comes the sad day that the ones that are still this tall after a couple of years don't make the grade and they have to be thrown out. That's very sad, because they are my little babies. So that was about the flower stalks. This had a couple of flower stalks on it, which I chopped off before we got here. The reasons I've left these ones on is because it's got a seed pod in the centre there, and you can see that. That's on the video. Yeah, so these 2 flowers have been successfully, this one here you can see it, have been successfully pollinated, and I'm keeping these to collect the seeds, which should be ready in about a month, in a few more weeks. But yeah, I would normally leave the flowers and the stalks there right up until it's dried down to the bottom, which the ones that weren't pollinated had already done so. I broke them off. It's fine to leave them there. The plants that get full sunlight can keep the flowers on them. Some people say to pull off all the Venus flytrap flowers unless you want seeds, because it uses up the strength of the plant. If your plants get sunlight directly on them for most of the day, they've got plenty of energy, they can afford to flower, and they don't lose all their energy. If you're growing them on a windowsill with just a couple of hours of light a day on them, that's when the light levels might be a little bit low and you don't want them expending unnecessary energy. And so you pull off the flower stalk before it really grows. But another thing is that while the flower stalk is growing, it grows from the growth point of the Venus flytrap, and it doesn't produce any traps during that time. So it'll put up, each growing point will put up 2 or 3 traps, and then they'll stop, and it'll produce a flower spike, which will go for 4 to 6 weeks or something, and during that time, no more traps. And that's usually in the lead up to Christmas. So I normally chop all the flowers off so that the traps start growing again get them out here for Christmas. Did that answer your question? Okay, right. Others? Yes?
Thanks for the fascinating presentation. It's really, really interesting. It's good news that they don't need to all have flies. The theatre said we have vegetarian variety because they don't bother going into it. This one in front of you, we have one much, much smaller. Now all the central section died away. The plant didn't die, it had lots of growth around the outside. But they weren't in this form, they were much flatter like leaves. And it didn't have these ones going up with the caps on. Yeah, didn't have those. Lots around the outside, healthy green, but not the central section.
So I was asked about one of the, similar to this, but not quite growing the same in a few ways. Did you say that it has a little bit of a cylindrical trap, but not much, and mostly the front strip here is extended?
It has the general shape of those.
Right.
It's flat, it's not tubular, and it hasn't got the cap going over the top of it. It's just growing around the outside of the top.
Has it got much of the reddish colour in the venation?
No.
So when these things here grow really thin and grow much larger leafy bits, this one here's got a larger leafy, the ala as it's called, the strip down the front. If it becomes mostly ala and very little tube, that's an indication of not enough sunlight. And the same thing here, is if it's got enough sunlight it will have red colour on it, and if it doesn't have enough sunlight it will be totally green. So that's, that would explain why it's flat and doesn't have much of a tube and no cap. In terms of growing around the outside of the pot and not in the centre, the rhizomes, they spread, they grow along under the bottom and they'll grow until they hit the sides of the pot, and the growing points are at the ends of the rhizomes. So I'd say yours is now pot bound and should probably be repotted. And because you'll have a few plants there, you can experiment with different places to grow them. You could try putting some outside in full sun and keep others on by a windowsill and just see what works best in terms of the right sort of light levels and humidity. Okay, thanks for that suggestion.
When you're watering them, are you better to water them from the top of the plant and let it filter down, or just water the tray?
Tray method's more reliable, but if you are very reliable at your watering, then you can do the top watering method, so long as you do keep them wet and don't let them dry out between watering.
And if it's in a tray, still water it from the top, or just water the tray?
So watering from the top has a slight hazard that this sort of potting mix with peat moss and so on in it is quite fine, and it can flush out through the bottom of the pots over time. So watering from the top is fine, but I found that the potting mix, that you get a bit of a void at the bottom as the peat moss washes out the bottom. So it's fine to water from the top, but just be aware of how much potting mix you might be losing.
Right, thank you.
Okay.